Unit 5, Footprint Chart Strategy Development. We're finally going to introduce the template to be utilized throughout Units 6 to 15. This is Challenge Day 6 of 30. So welcome back, guys, to Unit 5. We're finally getting to that last unit just before we start the real practical strategy application. So one more unit to go. Quite an important unit though. We are going to spend a lot of time introducing the template to be utilized throughout the strategies. So do make sure you spend a lot of time in this unit understanding how the template works effectively. So this is day 6 of 10. Tomorrow is that day off that you've all been waiting for. Make sure you obviously go back over some of those principles and have everything fully covered before we start up again on day 8 of 30. Now, where you should be as of right now, well, you should be, we're nearing the end of the first week. You should have a very good understanding of the footprint tool. You should know how to set it up, the basic navigation around the tool. What I would suggest, don't be afraid to click a lot, try new things. That way you're going to very quickly learn how the tool works effectively. Then obviously you should have a very strong understanding now of those principles we dealt with extensively in Unit 3. As mentioned in Unit 3, however, don't worry, because you are going to revisit those principles throughout every single one of these strategy sessions. Okay, so introduce the feedback tool, the feedback loop. Now, some of you might have, that are live members would have heard me talking about this, this unique process. Now, what the feedback loop is simply, a feedback occurs when outputs of a process are routed back as inputs. Okay, as part of a chain of cause and effect that forms a circuit or a loop. This system can then be said to feed back into itself. In other words, as you can see in the graphic, a decision is made. Okay, that's the beginning of the loop. Now, if we obviously get two types of circuits. The first would be a closed loop circuit. Now, a closed loop would, in essence, once we make a decision, there would be no other processes or no other inputs within that loop, and the very next action would be to make another decision. Now, straight away you can see why that can't be a good thing, simply because if we're simply just making decisions and executing, we're never able to really learn and give thought to the decisions we're making. Okay, so the second type of loop is the one we're going to obviously develop over this template, or with this template, is the open loop process. And this is simply a process that we want to create where we have certain pauses or certain inputs that allow us to stop, to review, to assess, to make decisions, etc., etc., before making the very next decision. Okay, so how does it work and how does it apply to trading? Now, the first thing is obviously we make a decision. As we can see in the yellow box, we make a decision, very straightforward. It's simply just a manner of execution. Now, the problem is if we don't have an open loop system, we're just going to end up making a lot of decisions. Okay, more often than not, they're probably going to be bad decisions. Now, once we've made that decision, okay, in order to get a closed loop circuit, we need to have some types of inputs, and the inputs we're going to discuss and develop in this unit are of 3 of the hundreds that you get. Okay, there are plenty of different inputs, but I'm only going to introduce you to 3 because they are extremely effective. Now, the first is an objective fact-based analysis. Okay, so we're going to spend a lot of time developing a fact-based analysis of the footprint charts. I'm going to show you with the use of a template how you want to be analyzing every single one of your strategies in an objective fact-based manner. Okay, now obviously that objective analysis, that would be our first input. Now, once we've obviously created this first input, we then have the second input, which is process development. And the third will be then application of that process development. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the unconscious and conscious in a minute, but the first thing is just to let you know, there are, as I said, hundreds of different inputs that you can develop. As you become more experienced as a trader, you're going to learn what sorts of inputs can ultimately add value to your trading, and you're going to adopt those processes into your loop. Now, Some of the other types of inputs that I have as a trader, and you can consider as well, is, for example, a routine analysis. All right, so I constantly review my routine to make sure that the routine I have is most effective to my ultimate feedback loop. Okay, I then have potential rules, all right, or a rules-based approach. So what this simply means is I have certain rules that I follow, exact rules, so that after I've made a decision, so long as I'm following these specific rules, they will ensure that I can measure the end decision or the end outcome based on, did I follow those rules. Another one is to take away the good and the bad elements and recognize the good elements at the end of every day and recognize the bad. I think sometimes as traders, all we do at the end of the day is we write down what we did bad, we write down what we did good, but we don't ever learn and grow from them. So this is another kind of input that you could develop in your feedback loop. Now, like I said, how this whole process decision making works, it's very simple. Okay, we've made a decision. Now the next process is to have an objective analysis. Okay, so once we've conducted an objective analysis, we then need to go and look at our process development. Okay, so all that a process development is that we want to go and write down all the processes that we did over a period of time within, obviously, before making the next decision, and we want to then go and analyze those processes. Okay, now the reason is a lot of the time within those processes we have there are what we call conscious or unconscious errors. Okay, in other words, we're making mistakes, but we don't even know that we're making those mistakes. Okay, so by having a process development, we can observe these mistakes. Right? For instance, let's say in our objective analysis, we recognize there's trend in the market. All right, now we can very clearly go at the end of the day and say, well, I was fading the market all day, even though objectively there was trend. Therefore, I was making unconscious errors. So we need to go correct that unconscious error. We need to put in place some form of a stop, or some form of a rules-based approach, or some form of a process, so that we can ultimately turn that unconscious error into a conscious error or a conscious correction. So let's look at an example of what an unconscious error could look like. Right? This example is something that probably many of you can relate to. It's impatience. Okay, not waiting for a trade strategy that you've learned, and instead you just impulsively trade the market, or you get sucked into trading what they call flow. Okay, now the first thing to do is we have to create some form of a conscious correction. Now, an example of a conscious correction would be for us to create a list of strategies on a trading sheet, and before you execute, before you make a decision, you have to tick the strategy observed. Okay, now again, a lot of you might say, well, that sounds very, very elementary, but the whole purpose of having a tick sheet where you ultimately tick off the strategy you observed is it's going to create a mental pause. Now that mental pause, that simple, brief second of thought, could be the difference between making a good and a bad decision. Okay, and it's that process that we've just created that effectively becomes the conscious correction. It's a thought, we've given thought to a correction. Now, it doesn't end there. Okay, obviously, you don't just suddenly adopt this new process and become better. Okay, you have to ingrain it into your habit. So again, you probably have to adopt this process for at least 14 consecutive days in order to eventually make the marginal gain. All right, now ultimately that would bring us then to the fourth part, which is the application. Okay, so by adopting this new habit, eventually that conscious correction which you make, where you tick the sheet, eventually that's going to become part of habit, and it will then become an unconscious decision or an unconscious correction. Okay, so it's very simple. We make a decision. We have various inputs. One of them is our daily debrief. That daily debrief will allow us to pick up on certain errors that we make. When we make an error, we obviously consciously recognizing the mistake. We want to develop a process to correct that mistake. So we want to turn that unconscious error into a conscious error, all right, or into a conscious correction. Now, once we've adopted a process through habit, and we've done it over a number of times, a number of days, eventually it will become an unconscious correction. Okay, now Obviously, then you need to rinse and repeat that every time you pick up on certain weaknesses. So this is an ongoing loop. Now, in the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a mentored session that I did all about this feedback loop and some of the processes you can adopt with a template debrief. Templating isn't solely a trading thing. You go into any industry, it doesn't matter what the industry is. Is it manufacturing? Is it industry? Is it finance, healthcare? It doesn't matter what the industry is. Every single industry has some form of a feedback loop. Okay. Now, by a feedback loop, what we mean is that if we were to just draw some sort of a graphic, okay, if we were to draw some sort of a graphic, okay, what a feedback loop allows us is once we make a decision, all right, along the path, all right, we don't want what they call a closed feedback loop. Okay, all a closed feedback loop is that once we make a decision, call it decision A, we get this sort of roundabout process where we execute, we get an outcome, and eventually we get back to the starting point. Okay, so a closed feedback loop never allows us to actually stop and look and investigate and make certain changes and ultimately improve. Okay, so what we as traders or what people in industry do, what successful companies do, is they create what we call a stop within the feedback loop, a point where they can stop and make reference. So they can stop the process and say, okay, let's look where we are currently and let's ultimately see if we can improve, make more efficient and progress. Okay, and this is the concept of a feedback loop, okay, a non-closed feedback loop. Now, how this relates to trading and why it's so important to trading is because trading is one of the few disciplines that ultimately it forces us to have closed feedback loops. Why? Well, because from the moment that we click at point A to the moment that we get back around, there's probably another decision that needs to be taken. Okay, so because of the very nature of trading, because it's so fast-paced, and because it merits or it rewards straight away upon exit, we never actually stop within that loop to then try and make efficiencies and progress. Okay, and that's why templating is so crucial in trading. That you have to, that is like one of the 10 commandments of trading. You have to have some form of a process within your feedback loop that stops you so that you can ultimately progress. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to take you through a template, one that I use. I'm going to take you through how it works, and then obviously take you through the nitty-gritty so that you can see the benefits of how this non-closed feedback loop will look at the end. Okay, so the first most important thing, okay, I'm utilizing Footprint within the Evernote, and the first thing to understand is you need to be able to summarize a day. Okay, why? Because within any given day, a number of variables are coming out and what we call noise. Okay, so the first place I like to start is I like to almost just summarize the entire session within a couple of words. Now, obviously this was taken a few days ago, but if I was to just cast my mind back to today, I'll close my eyes and I'll say, okay, well, I came in this morning. There was obviously a little bit of news overnight about the UK, but ultimately the flow is relatively slow. There was nothing really great going on. There's no real correlations going on. The equities were very bid because of the mini S&P. But other than that, there's not been a great deal that I would put into my sentiment overview. Okay, if there was some risk off overnight because of the yen or because of China, then I'd put that in there. Okay, now the reason we do this is because when we can summarize sentiment and overview, what's going to start happening if you summarize it every day, you're going to start to recognize certain patterns. So what do I mean by that? Let's say for all intents and purposes you go back 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Right, there was a period where we were actually seeing a lot of volatility in the Nikkei. Okay, it was ranging within a 2% range, and as a result of that volatility, we were seeing volatility pass over into the European session. So how does that give us an opportunity? Well, if you can recognize this volatility early on and you start to recognize these patterns, you then come in with a very specific frame of mind. Okay, and it's that frame of mind that ultimately gives you that little bit of an edge. It doesn't guarantee success, it doesn't mean profit, but it gives you that little edge on the guy next to you who's not been doing this day-to-day sentiment overview. Okay, so that's where we start. We do a sentiment overview. Then we go and list all the economic data. Why? Again, it's very simple. And I spoke about this, when did I speak about it? I've spoken about it at some point, but if you start to look at the economic data, every single piece, okay, what you're going to recognize is that the markets are sensitive to certain economic data pieces. Okay, the markets sometimes open up, or we get flows once a certain economic data piece is out of the way. And you're also going to notice when data pieces are no longer a valid edge to trade. Okay, so again, you do this because it helps you to develop an edge in and around when we have key economic data. Now, any trader knows that over the course of a week, you are going to have every single week, at least at some point in the week, you're going to have some key economic data. Okay, so again, by templating it, you're going to know when a non-farm payrolls is trending the market. You're going to know when inflation is important. Okay, you're going to know when other data pieces are actually, creating opportunities in and around the data. Okay. Then we then move on, and again, I'm not going to go through this every single time. I want you to get the gist of it so we can get to the real nitty-gritty of it. Right? Then what I like to do is I like to go and list effectively all markets traded. Again, why do I do this? Because I'm creating a pause. Okay, I'm creating that within that feedback loop between when I traded today and when I come in again tomorrow. I want to create some sort of a pause along the way so that I can recognize certain pattern behaviors within my trading. Now, the reason we list all the markets is because for me, I tend to find when I trade multiple markets in a day, i.e. anything more than 4 different markets, I tend to lose money. In other words, there's a high correlation between the more markets I trade to my P&L. Okay, so more markets equals less P&L. Okay, and again, why? Well, because I'm only one human, and obviously I can only see so many things within a day. So the fact that I'm trading multiple markets means I'm probably fishing somewhere, just hoping to get a winner somewhere. Okay, so again, that's why we list the markets. Then, and this is crucial, and again, it's so important, particularly in this closed feedback loop. You go and list every tradable opportunity. Now, by tradable opportunities, I don't mean the hindsight Harry ones. Okay, I mean I know this pattern. I've developed this pattern over the years. Okay, what were the patterns that were available for me today to execute? Okay, not the ones that came up, not the comment that came out. Okay, the ones that I recognized. Bang, we had an outside day. I've known that pattern. I've journaled that pattern for 3-4 months. Okay, which trade opportunities came up today? Now again, why is that important, or where is that important in the feedback loop? Well, again, this is so important for the psychology, okay? Because what a lot of traders do is they sometimes get into a frame of mind that the markets aren't offering opportunity, okay? Now, by listing every single day the opportunities that come out, you're going to start to have a self-belief. It's a reinforcing principle that every single day there's at least one opportunity, okay? Now, if I told you what's the percentage of there being a opportunity every single day, you will know that if you are following this every single day. Okay, and if you know that on average there's at least 2 tradable opportunities every single day, you're not going to rush into the market, you're not going to create certain patterns, you're ultimately just going to wait for those tradable opportunities. Okay, and that's what counts, guys. That's why we create this loop, because let's say you didn't have this loop. Let's remove this loop and see what it would look like if we didn't have this loop. Okay, you would come in, you wouldn't have any loops, right? You've just lost the previous day. You come in, you're a little bit anxious, you're a little bit tight, you're not sure what to do, you're kind of just looking at the market, you're not sure if it's going to give you something or not. Okay, so straight away the mentality is that you're going to be more aggressive, you're going to start fishing early on, hoping for something, and yes, okay, you might get it right, but ultimately you might lose more money. Okay, if you lose money, what happens in terms of psychology? You begin to spiral, you chase even more, and you just double down on your losses. If we put that pause in place, okay, we are losing nothing, but we are only potentially gaining something, which is confidence with our psychology. Okay, so again, this is why we create the pauses in the feedback loop. Okay, then I'm going to go through these really quickly. So we then look at areas of focus. Okay, these are the areas within your own trading that you want to focus on. Okay, and you take them apart. You start off with maybe your discipline. Okay, Okay, and you go right out. You say to yourself, well, today I was impulsive. There were 3 trades. The guy next to me was like, oh, check the oil out, and I just went and bought it because it was taking out the high. Okay, and you go and you do an honest self-reflection. This is a real, must-do in your feedback loop. Okay, you do an honest self-reflection of what I'm doing. Okay, what I'm doing both, that is concerning and that is affecting my trading. Okay, because if you don't do this area of focus, this honesty test with yourself, well, guess what? You're just bluffing yourself. You're bullshitting yourself. Okay, you're going to come in the next day, so we draw the feedback loop. You're going to come in the next day. You might have taken a winner the previous day. You might have taken a loser, but it's irrelevant, okay, because you're not gaining anything because you're not being honest with yourself about things you need to focus on. So again, what do? We create the pause. We look at things. Am I keeping it simple? Am I disciplined? Am I patient? Am I executing well? Am I averaging? Am I moving stops? Okay, you go through all these areas of focus, you write them out, and you write out an honest self-reflection. Then we talk about achievements, and this is again so crucial in the feedback loop, okay? Because let's say we took a loss, let's say we had a bad day. Okay, I know one trader in mind who said to me yesterday he had a really bad day, one of the worst of the year. And I said to him, most important in every single debrief, firstly, you have to do a debrief. Doesn't matter what the day is, good or bad, win or lose, best or worst day, you have to do some form of a debrief. Okay? And within that debrief, you always have to talk about achievements. Why? Because that brings you back to the planet Earth. Okay? That makes sure that you're recognizing that trading on any given day, right, does not define your career. Okay? Trading is defined by a number of days, a number of years, all right? And it's those achievements that you want to lean on any given day. So, if you came in the morning and you did a really good pre-market brief, write it down. Why? Because when you come in the next day, you say, okay, well, look, these were areas. Yes, I lost money. However, I did a really good morning session. I was really prepared. My routine was good. I came in on time. I did a really good meditation set in the middle of the day, and that made me more balanced. Okay, because it's ultimately the achievements you want to keep doing, and it's the areas of focus that you want to work on. Again, we create another pause in the feedback loop. Then your performance metrics, okay, and this is where it becomes a little more intricate. And you can add, by the way, this is not concise by any means. You can add a whole host of things into a template. Then I like to look at performance metrics. So I like to say to myself, if my goal, okay, for performance metrics, I tend to look at goals. So I say to myself, if my goal is size accumulation, all right, I want to make sure that the way to get better at size accumulation is with a tick box. Okay, so I say to myself, well, if my goal is size accumulation, how am I going to get there? Well, it needs to be gradual, it needs to be deliberate, it needs to be rehearsed, and it needs to be the daily goal I set out for myself. So again, at the end of every single day, I go and say, well, was I gradual in the increments? Was I deliberate? Was I rehearsed? And did it achieve my daily goal? If it didn't, well, guess what? You didn't achieve this goal. So what do? You come back to it again tomorrow and you try and achieve it. Okay, if you did achieve it, you give yourself a big fat tick, and guess what? You come back to it tomorrow again and you try and do it again. Why? Because only then do you start to develop habits. Okay, and you do the same thing. These are just goals that I, set myself. I'm very bad when it comes to doing debriefs. It's ironic I'm actually doing this, this entire templating, because I'm not very consistent with completing my debriefs. Right? Why? Because I'm good at finding 1,001 excuses not to do it. Okay, call it lazy, call it focused on other things, but at the end of the day, this is one of the single most important things for the success of not just me, but for traders. Okay, then I go over level of focus, again, something that I find is crucial to my trading. Right? How is my level of focus in the morning and then also in the afternoon session? Right? Again, there's a correlation. If I have a low level of focus, guess what my performance is going to be? Okay, it's going to be low, not necessarily P&L. Never associate performance with P&L. Okay, performance and P&L are completely separate things. The one does not equal the other. You can perform well and lose money. You can perform badly and make money. Okay, and then obviously level of commitment. And this is something for me internally that when just what I mean by it in essence is when I look at a trade, when I'm coming in and I'm focused 100%, am I committing to taking on what I believe is the right trade, the right strategy? Okay, so again, I go and list it. What is my level of commitment? Was it low, average, or high? Okay, again, there's a high correlation. If I'm highly committed, right, my performance will be extremely high. My focus will probably be very high. Okay, hopefully you're all starting to recognize something, straight away, which is that, i.e., this trader has got certain correlations between the more markets he trades, obviously, his P&L will vary. If he's very focused, he'll perform better. If he has a high level of commitment, he'll perform at a high performance. Okay? And that is why we do a template, because all of a sudden, we've got this big little feedback loop, and we're creating all these markers by which we can come and compare and learn to observe certain patterns about ourselves. And that is ultimately what the art of trading is about. It's about constantly recognizing how you're progressing, constantly ensuring that you're improving by creating every one of these pauses. Okay, that's all the pause is. It's within the feedback loop, ensuring we're allowing ourselves to progress, to grow, to improve, and ultimately make more money. Okay. Now, if that doesn't convince you that this is the bloodline of trading, okay, let's look on the reverse side. I always like to play devil's advocate and say, let's say we remove all of these. Okay. What are we going to gain from not doing a debrief? Okay, we're going to gain a fat zero, maybe 45 minutes a day of our time that we feel is valuable. Okay, compare that to what you'll gain if you do start doing it. Okay, you start to gain all sorts of wonderful things: confidence, trust, self-belief, understanding, patience, skills, all right, and ultimately money. Okay, now you then finish off a debrief with some goals. Very, very important. Keep them simplistic and realistic. Okay, again, the goals just pauses you. If yesterday you had a bad day, you didn't set yourself a goal today, well, what are you trying to achieve? What are you striving towards today? Okay, and again, the mistake a lot of traders make, they want 3 or 4 goals. If I can give you one goal, it could be set one goal every day. If that goal is just to get up the time that your alarm goes off so you can be in the office exactly at 6:30 in the morning, well, that's a very good goal to set yourself. Okay. Also, remember, goals are not just a one-day thing. You don't set a one-day goal. Okay, goal tends to be at least a couple of days. I'd say, in general, it takes 21 days to form a very solid habit. Okay, so if you want to form a solid habit, you've got to set a goal for 21 days. Okay, did I get up this morning on time? Yes, I did. Tomorrow, did I get up on time? Yes, I did. Did I get up on time? Yes, I did. Okay. Then we get to the nitty-gritty, and this is where it becomes very intricate. I'm not going to go to this in detail, but then you want to go through your strategy analysis. All right. So you take each pattern, as we observed up top. You take each strategy that you broke down. Okay, you wrote them down. Yeah, your tradable opportunities. You wrote them down, and you now bring that tradable opportunity into its metric form. What do we mean by that? Okay, every trade strategy has got a set of characteristics, and we go define those characteristics. Now, I'm going to use the basic example of a flag, because we all know flag, it looks juicy, it makes a lot of sense, and la la la. Now, what we need to do is, within that pattern, we need to recognize and observe that pattern within a number of metrics. Now, again, this is not a concise list, it's an example. Okay? So we want to observe that pattern through volume. We want to note what the volume is: high, low, relatively high, relatively low. Where does the volume come in? We then want to look at it in terms of time. How long does the pattern time to play out? At what time of the day does it take to play out? What does the delta do? What does the cumulative delta do? And what is the relative changes? How does the market shift in terms of volatility, in terms of price response, in terms of price action? Okay, how does the interaction shift between buyers and sellers? And we go through and we ask ourselves this question, and we answer. We say to ourselves, okay, well, within this breakout, I observed there was extremely high volume, and I write it out. And the same thing, I write out the time was this during this event. I look at the delta and the relative change, and I write this all out. And again, why do we do this? Because guess what? You're always going to get breakout trades in the markets. Okay, you had them last year, the year before, and you're going to get them next year and the year after that. Okay. So these characteristics, all we're doing is we're highlighting the key observations of a trade strategy. We're observing them, and ultimately we're starting to build almost an understanding, an in-depth understanding of what creates a good breakout. So again, let's take a step back. Let's just say our feedback loop is here. Let's say today we took out a breakout trade in oil. Okay. And we didn't go through all of this at the end of the day. We just thought, I got it right. Bang, I nailed it. Awesome. Okay? And let's say there was one defining metric in there today that was this really, really high volume, abnormally high. Okay? I'd noted that, over the last 20 of these breakouts, there was abnormally high volume today. It was the highest I've ever seen, and the breakout was incredible. It's like 80 ticks. But I don't go and log that information in my brain. I don't go and physically think about it, give it thought, give it energy, and log it in there for next time. What happens tomorrow if the breakout comes and this time there's low volume? Okay, so we didn't do the analysis. We come back tomorrow, but there's very low volume on this breakout. Guess what we're going to do as instinctive creatures? We're going to come in and we're going to trade that breakout exactly the same way. Why? Because yesterday, our bad habit got reinforced. We got rewarded. Okay, we executed well. We got paid very well. Today, something was different, but we're still going to execute the same way we did, if not more aggressively. And what's the outcome of that going to be? Okay, we're going to lose money. Now, the profound part of that, and this is the most beautiful part. Let's say you had done an analysis and you had recognized over time that when there's a low volume, the probability of outcome goes from, let's say, 80% to like 30%. Now, it's not to say you wouldn't have taken the breakout. Of course you would have, but you would never have taken it with the same kind of conviction as the previous day or with more size. And that's the crux of it. It's that little piece of 45 minutes of time you spent just analyzing that gives you that little edge in decision making in the next opportunity. And that's the crux of templating, guys. It comes down to, in this feedback loop, ensuring that the feedback loop is not closed. Because when it is closed off, you are not growing, you're not progressing, and you're not gaining anything. Create some pauses for yourself, okay? You do it in the form of a template. And again, templating is not just for trading. It is for every single industry that you can think of. They all have some form of templating so that they don't have a closed loop system. Okay.